Well, howdy, everyone. It's Mike, and we have somebody with us today. Who is with us? I cannot imagine who that could be. Who came
It's
in?
follow through
Actually,
Fahmy.
follow through Fami. Oh my God, you're here. Why do people call you follow through Fami?
You guys started calling me that because I just happened by coincidence, like when I'm honored that you schedule me on IBD Live, it's just like by total coincidence, it's been on follow through days like three or four times.
Ali schedules all that, and when we need you, we call you because we need we need you to turn the market around, man. It's always so much fun when you come in because it's like, okay, it'll be a good day if Joe's here.
It's funny. Yeah, no, I'm honored to be on this podcast, and anytime you guys invite me on, it's fun. So always a great discussion.
Yeah, well, I've known you for a while now. We started off. We did that rant a number of years ago with Arusha, and our good buddy that you had on your podcast twice. So,
Yeah.
well, you know what? People probably don't know about your podcast. I was going to circle back to that later, but just so we don't forget, why don't we? Like really motivated me to want to get Webby Rambles on out. So, you know, tell me about because I'm just riding your coattails, brother. So like, tell me about your the reason why you started it, what it is, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, and I'm again, I'm honored that I was able to. You've been such an incredible mentor to me and an influence. So if I pushed you to kind of do a podcast, then that's awesome. I'm just lucky to know a lot of cool people. I love talking markets. Like you and I could, we always joke when we go to dinner, we talk for like hours and hours, and we could
Yeah.
probably talk for hours now. But it's not just, knowing cool people in the markets. I've been lucky to meet some cool people in music and sports and so forth. And I never really put something consistent together because my podcast producer, who I'm working with now, he says the key to a great podcast is consistency. You can't just do one, two, three, four episodes and then stop. And I kind of did that in the past where I tried it a couple times and then, but long story short is now I have a place when I'm in Vegas and I'm out there. I have clients out there and so forth. So when I'm out there, I got a great studio, which you've been a part
Yeah.
of. And
Dude, that's a fun studio. That's like the real deal, not like just my little work office, man. That,
it's
that
same
that's
with me
that's
too
super
here. I
cool.
mean, we have just our regular small home office stuff, but some of the top podcasts in the country record out of that studio. Some UFC people and some health and wellness, some crypto, all sorts of different genres or verticals of whatever you want to call it, topics. So it's a great place. I can plop my ass in the chair. I don't have to worry about cameras. I don't have to worry about the microphone. I don't have to worry about editing or lights, any of that stuff. He does it all for me, and it's a great opportunity for me to do something a little more consistent.
Dude, I've watched every single one of your episodes. My favorite one was there was two of them. One Emily, right? I always get her name wrong.
Oh, Emily Campagno, yeah.
Yeah, Emily's. I always get her last name wrong. And then Frank, who you had on last week, who you introduced me to, and man, both of those were great. So, what have been your favorite episodes first so far? And you cannot mention the one that I was on.
You're my most highly watched one, so that's my favorite.
Well, see,
Whichever gets the most views is my favorite. No, I'm kidding. No, I think yours is the most highly watched. You have a great audience, and people in IBD Live love you and all that stuff, so it's great. I don't want to say it's like children where you love them all equally, but I'm learning a lot doing this. I think my biggest fear is I try to do about an hour. It's called Joe's Happy Hour for anyone who doesn't know it. You can find it on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts and all your podcasting platforms. Anyways, I try to go about an hour, but my biggest fear is I'm going to get 15 minutes through it and I'm going to be twiddling my thumbs like, okay, what do we talk about next? So I'm trying to get good at, I have some topics written down, some bullet points. I'm trying to get good at interviewing, listening, how to steer the conversation. With someone like you, when it's market related, I don't have to really prepare anything because we can just rattle off forever. But if it's like a magician or, something that's like out of my wheelhouse, I definitely, it's a challenge to get through an hour interview that is going to hopefully flow for the audience?
Well, they've all you know, flowed the way they should. You know, just being, you know, totally fair and objective. Like I like all of them. You picked really good guests from all different genres, so it keeps it interesting every week. It's like, oh, who's Joe going to have on now? I've done a lot of work and prep for these. Like I've got a bunch of questions here, so here are my questions.
Okay.
So
You have
it,
two
I
questions.
have two questions for you. So we're going to circle back to these at the very end, so you can think about it a little bit more. So if people see your wheel spinning, and so my questions for Joe: favorite live album. All right, that's a way of getting a best in. That's a backdoor way of getting a best in. And your favorite studio album that cannot be a best of, but it can be a double album. So that'll be at the very end.
Okay.
So everyone's going to have to, you know, just find out if Joe has great taste in music or poor taste in music. So I don't know. Pressure's on, dude.
Pressure's on.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, it's funny when you mentioned notes. I think this is a sign of, for me, a good podcast and a good conversation. Is I'll have 10 or 15 bullet points, and if I look at the time and I'm on bullet point number 2 and we're 45 minutes into it, that's a good sign. That, just like a good conversation, time flies when you're having fun, and
Yeah.
oh, look at the time. It's amazing how time can fly. But there was a couple where I was 10 or 12 bullet points into it, and I looked at the timer and I was 10 minutes into it, and I was like, oh,
What did
shit.
you
I'm
do,
like,
man?
I'm like, I got 45 minutes of BSing people. Like, so you just hope to have a good conversation, but it's an art. I love watching Joe Rogan. I love watching, he's
Yeah.
one of the best in the business. I love watching other people's podcasts to kind of get Howard Stern is like one of the original amazing interviewers of our time. It's an art to have a good conversation. So when you ask my favorite one, I love them all in the sense of learning and growing and how to direct traffic and ask questions. It's really a great challenge and a lot of fun at the same time.
Dude, well, you do a great job. And I will say, like, you know, I'm a huge fan of Joe Rogan, and I listen to his stuff all the time. And he is just seems like such a genuine guy. And if anyone were to tell me he wasn't, I'm just not going to listen to you because he just seems like such a great guy and with a really open mind, but really, once he's figured something out, he's figured it out. And you had mentioned Howard Stern. I used to listen to his stuff all the time back when I had Sirius, you know, was commuting. And what was great about him is he would ask questions to people that they didn't want to answer. You know, like very, you know, we want to keep this a family show, so things that were like inappropriate.
Yeah.
And then they would just then he would ask them the question that they weren't supposed to answer that was like non that stuff, and they were just happy to be kind of off the hot seat with the things they really didn't want to talk about, and then they would really open up. And I don't know if he did that just subconsciously or that was an intent, but did you notice that when he would do
Yeah, I
interviews?
think that's a great point. I think that's just a sign of a great interviewer making someone comfortable.
Yeah.
Because you're right, he would get into some really personal stuff and stuff that you would never hear anywhere else, and they had no problem opening up because he just made them comfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just great. And I knew someone who 20, 30 years ago who built out his one of his studios, and they just said he's just the nicest guy in real life. Yes, he's got this persona on, you know, the shock jock type of thing. This is back when before Sirius. Like this is when he was on whatever radio station,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I guess he's a great guy just like you. But
Yeah.
you're a great guy everywhere, man. You're a great guy on camera and off camera, which is just wonderful.
I try. I know your rule, number one rule, or whatever you call it, rule of life. Just be kind, be good to people. It's good karma that'll come back to you. I mean, yeah, we can all have bad days, and especially in trading where there's emotions and money involved and stuff, but don't take it out on other people. Just try your best to just, be good to people. You like that whole line, you never know what people are going through. So it's always good to be kind to people.
Yeah, I've got a shirt with that on, and it is so true. So, you know, bringing up trading, you know, with with trading, I was just thinking, you know, how I know how I kind of deal with the ups and downs of the market. How I don't think we've ever talked about it. How do you how do you deal with when, things are kind of euphoric and you're just like killing it and everything is connecting, and there's big problems can happen there. And then also when you're just down and out and just you can't connect it. I mean, I told someone the other day, it's like if there are times you could give me 10 stocks, 9 of which are going to be huge model book stocks, and somehow I'll just pick the one that is going to fail. Like there are times where it's like it doesn't matter what you do. So how do you deal with that? Let's start off with the good times. And when things are just rocking and you're just killing it, you think something's going to go up, it goes up. You think something's going to go down, it goes down. How how do you balance yourself out so you don't get ahead of your skis?
Um, I think, having done this a long time now, the first, about 30 years of trading, I would say, honestly, the first 12 to 15 years was a lot of, boom and bust trading, where when we had great markets, I would kill it and give it all back in the corrections,
Hmm.
and then kill it again and give it all back. And I kind of got sick of that, where I just realized, one simple word: acceptance. I just accept that there's going to be times when the market's healthy and take advantage of it. And there's going to be times where we're going to have corrections. And now you're opening up a whole can of worms, because this is where the conversation can go on for hours. But what comes to my mind is what, Peter Lynch said, and I'm paraphrasing him, about there's just cycles of the market. We've seen 30 or 40 bull markets, 30 or 40 bear, whatever the numbers are. I'm making them up. You obviously know them better. But you just have to, that's why Livermore simplified it to uptrends and downtrends. So accept there's going to be uptrends, identify them, try to take advantage, and accept that we're going to have pullbacks, corrections, shakeouts, bear markets, downtrends, whatever you want to call them. And once I accepted that there's going to be cycles in the markets, then it made it so much easier to say, okay, when things are good, take advantage of it and do your best to take advantage of it. And then when you see warning signs, get defensive and do your best to protect capital. You're not going to be immaculate and be perfect and trade it where you're going to get out on the dead highs and avoid all the damage. But if you can take advantage of the upside and capture most of it and minimize the downside when you see warning signs, then that's a huge accomplishment for any trader or investor.
I totally agree with that. So now switching gears to when, we all are get off. I've seen it with, I've worked with a lot of PMs over the years. When I was a PM at O'Neill, there was typically about 10 PMs on staff. So I've seen it all, the hottest of the hot and the coldest of the cold. And I've been the hottest of the hot and colder than the coldest of, I've been like Antarctica cold and everything in between. And I saw Bill too get super cold, so it can, if it can happen to Bill O'Neill, it can happen to anyone. So how do you deal with when you're struggling at all? Like one of the things I do, well, what do you do?
Um, I think the times I struggle is when I'm forcing it in a difficult market. Um, I saw an interview with Stanley Druckenmiller not too long ago, and he's one of the best. 30
Oh,
straight positive years, an average of 30% returns net of fees. I mean, that's why some
it's
people
hard to
call
get
him the
better than
GOAT.
that, man. Like, I mean, you've got the Jim Simons from an algo standpoint that put up better numbers, but from a human picking, I don't think there's anyone better, is
Yeah,
there?
no, the numbers are. You're right. There, James Simons, I think, was like 36, but and he had a team of, not to take anything away from him,
Yeah.
a team of mathematicians and quantitative everything. Anyways, let's just say he's one of the top 3 to 5 of all time.
Yeah.
As and you got to remember, it's other people's money. It's not
Yeah.
managing his own money, and there's that human
Ugh.
psychology element of you have no one to report to when you're trading on your own. Maybe a spouse, that could be a factor. But my point is, when you are dealing with clients and institutions, as Druckenmiller and Simons were dealing with, it's amazing because you do have that pressure. That is a human pressure of, if you're golfing, you might be able to hit a great shot in practice, but when it's for a tournament with the money on the line on national television, there's a lot of psychology when you're in front of other people and there's pressure. Anyways, Druckenmiller's like, I loved what he said because the human side of him came out. He's like, I'm a junkie. I'm a junkie. I love the markets, but He has two amazing abilities in my view. One is he's like, look, when I see that fat pitch, whatever he calls his fat pitch, he's a global macro manager. He's dealing with commodities, currencies, fixed income, stocks, all sorts of stuff. So, whatever his fat pitch is, meaning his sweet spot of when things are lining up, he's like, I step on the gas. When I don't see that fat pitch, he tones everything down. And so instead of 1,000 shares, he'll trade 100 shares, whatever his math is.
Mm-hmm.
And my point is that the two amazing abilities in that is number one, to identify that fat pitch. Let's say for people who do IBD O'Neill style, let's just say it's a power trend and uptrend. That
Mm-hmm.
might be the healthy time to identify. So it's number one is identifying your fat pitch, which works for what you're doing, or, let's just say for most of your audience, a power trend. So that's an amazing ability to identify that. The second thing I think is even harder. What Druckenmiller does is the emotional control so that you're not stepping on the gas the entire time. You
Yeah.
can't be fully on margin and thinking every breakout's going to work and the market's going to be amazing all the time. I think if you have that control and the ability to have that emotional control to say, okay, this is a healthy time, I'm going to get aggressive. This is not a good time. And Druckenmiller recognizes that. If you're an individual, you can take some time off. But for someone like him, at the time he was managing money professionally, billions and 5, 10, whatever, 12 billion, whatever he was managing, like you can't just go to cash and, go to the beach because you have other positions and all that stuff. But the whole point is he had the amazing control to recognize it's not a good environment and tone things down. And in my opinion, that's why he's one of the best ever.
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything you said. And man, that guy is just a stud. And I had picked up on that same concept back in the 90s when I read, and we were talking about this pre-show of Marty Schwartz's Pitbull book. And in the middle of it, he's got it's just like a paragraph or something, but I think it's worth reading the whole book just for that. And it was basically when he is struggling in the market, he would get tiny in the market until he started connecting, and then he would increase. And when I read that, it was like so eye-opening to get small when you're struggling. Now, when you're struggling emotionally, I think we're all wired that, let's
You
say
want to
you're
force it and get it all back.
exactly, so how do you think the average person should deal with that? Because, let's say you have $100 and then you ran into some problems. Now it's 90 or it's $80. So you're 20% off your highs and you just want to get back to 100 and you wanted to get to 101. What would you say to people who are feeling that pressure of trying to make it back, who don't want to do what they should do? So what would you tell to someone who's in that
I mean,
position?
look, the chocolate cake sitting in front of you on the table, so's the pizza. It's self-discipline, self-control. And it's not like not having sympathy for there, because I've been there a million times and still am there sometimes, but you got to have discipline in your life. You have to have the ability to, you know, going back to, kind of combining what you just asked in earlier about how you deal with these things is when I struggle, usually because it's not a good market and I'm forcing things and I've
Mhm.
no one to blame but myself. When I'm doing well, I always joke, like, let's say I pick 10 stocks and almost all of them are working. I think I'm a decent enough stock picker. I'm not that good. And when I pick 10 stocks and none of them are working, I'm a decent enough stock picker. I'm not that bad either.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing well, it's usually because we're in an uptrend. The wind's at your back, support is being gobbled up. There's a constant bid under the market, little distribution, all of that stuff. And I learn on the highs not to get too high and just recognize the environment we're in. We're in a good market. As they say, don't mistake brains with a bull market. Things are good. Accept that, take advantage of it, and just be grateful we have a good market when they come around. When it's a bad market and I'm struggling, in other words, I don't think I struggle that much when the wind's at your back and a lot of things are working out. I might have said, oh, I picked this stock instead of the other, but it's not like I don't have anything else working out.
Mhm.
but or I might have missed a trade. But when I'm really struggling, it's because usually it's not a good environment, and I have to do a better job of toning down your risk, trading smaller, having that self control, and again, that acceptance to say, I think O'Neill said in one of his books, like springs will be right around the corner before you know it.
Yeah.
Meaning you're in a bear market. Don't get bogged down that this is the end of the world. You're never going to make money again. You're going to struggle. The market's never going to be healthy again. Have some self discipline and some self control and just say, spring's going to be around the corner. There'll be a healthier and a better time around the corner, and save your capital for those healthier times. And we all have to learn it the hard way. But when you eventually accept that, the clarity is amazing once you eventually accept that.
Dude, yeah, that was brilliant. There's a reason why you're so smart. So let's get into kind of more the nitty gritty of your style of trading, because we all have styles, right? Your style is we're all trading the basic same style. Like if you equate it to music, like let's say we're all in the rock genre. Some of us are more, like on the Metallica end, and some of us are more on the, you know, well, what would be the opposite of Metallica, but still in rock?
No,
Well, you like, I don't know. I don't want this to go off on the music yet.
I know.
So, the nitty gritty of your style. So, one of the favorite things that you've told me about your style was your position size maximum. And so, why don't you talk to people about how you like to build out your account, and kind of what like your standard go to of spreading things out based on sectors, and however you want to look at it.
Um, I think one of the top two or three questions I get, I'm sure you would agree, you get on IBD Live, any investment professional trader, is about position size. Because, okay, you identify a stock, how much should I buy? How much, what percentage of my portfolio should it be? And there is no right or wrong answer. And when we sometimes say it depends, that's not a cop out, because it really does depend. So many people ask questions in the markets that are great questions, and there's black and there's white and there's a boatload of gray in between. In fact, the majority of it's gray. So how it deals when people want to say, oh, hold over earnings, position size, how many positions should I own? What, how should I construct a portfolio? All of those things are great questions, but there is no right or wrong answer. With position size, if the big factor for me is it depends if you are trading for yourself or managing money for clients. I think that's a huge difference. So
Oh,
for
big
me,
time.
when I answered that question when we talked a while back, I was answering it from a client perspective of about 5% positions, because I'm going with the math that I think they say the studies show that about 20 stocks is perfect diversification or good enough, meaning that if you have 20 stocks, 5% positions, 20 times 5, you're 100% invested um, on the 5% positions. So, and that's about a good sweet spot, because if I do trade some growth names, some riskier names, even some biotech, if one of them gaps down 20%, it's not going to ruin your portfolio. It's not fun, but if a 5% position gaps down 20%, all right, so it hits you 1% on $100, you get hit down to 99. It's not going to ruin your portfolio. Now, some people who trade individually are like, well, what's a 5% position going to do for me? Because if a stock doubles, I want to move my $100 to 150 or 200. So they might take a 20, 25, 40, 50% position. That's an individual, again, who doesn't have anyone to answer to if that stock gaps down even more than 20%. So I think the answer depends on your risk tolerance. And then really quick, going back, because most people are individual traders, I know some people who are kind of new to trading and they're comfortable with a 1% position as they become more comfortable with trading stocks. Because I don't know if I'm not going to speak for you, but I know a lot of times I take a lot of things for granted and I just assume people understand all of this stuff. There are a lot of people very new to trading where They just want to get their feet wet. You
Yep.
know, you can't lift 25 pounds until you learn how to lift 5 pounds. So you can't trade 100 shares until you learn how to trade 10 shares. So for some people, a 1% position is their comfort zone. So again, to sum it up, sorry, now it's Fahmy rambling on.
Dude, I love it, man. I love it. That's why I'm here. That's why I wanted you to be on. Keep going, man.
Yeah, no, to sum it up, like it depends if you're an individual or an institution or you're managing money, you know, an RIA, an investment advisor, a hedge fund, whatever. If you're managing money for other people, that's a huge factor. But let's go with individuals. I think 5% is a good, sweet spot because also a lot of the stocks we trade, if you're trading a growth canceling type of strategy, some of these stocks can appreciate rapidly, so if you're sitting in a bunch of utilities, dividend names, nothing wrong with that. If that's your strategy, they're going to be like AT&T is going to move different than Netflix.
Big time.
ExxonMobil is going to move different than Nvidia. Like you have to understand, as Livermore says, stocks are like people. They all have different personalities. Some are more volatile, some are crazy, some are more calm. You have to understand the nature of the stock you're trading, so that can affect your position size as well. So I might be a little bit more than 5 on a big institutional quality name. I might be 1 or 2 on a biotech that could gap down 50% if bad data comes out. So that's the other factor, is you have to know the nature, the flavor, the character of the stock also in determining position size.
Well, dude, I love that because you found an amount in when you told me. I still remember. I think where it was really late at night and we were talking, and you mentioned that 5%. I'm like, oh, Fami is going to be around forever because I running money for Bill. He liked concentrated accounts, and we would get really concentrated. There was a time where we were 200% long, just Apple and Google, and I was like 120% long Apple and 80% Google, and everyone was in maybe 120% Google and 80, like in that 100 to 100. Dude, that was stressful. We made a ton of money on it, but we could have made more if we would have had less. And I look back at that and I said, you know what? If we would have just capped ourselves out at 25% each, which is still, in the industry, that's crazy. 25% in a stock with other people's money is just, sometimes thought of as reckless, but we were doing 100% plus. And Bill encouraged that. And I look back at it and just go, man, I went to bed every night thinking like Steve Jobs' plane is going to go down, and we're going to go out of business. That was a real fear I had. And so there was that thing of, sell down to the sleeping level. And when you said the 5%, I'm like, he's gold. He won't. You will trade so much better because that the risk management, that simple risk management of having small size, and that small size could be a 2.5% position, a 10% position, a 5%, somewhere in that ballpark where you're at, that you're going to be able to handle the wiggles and wobbles because you're going to get lots of stocks that are down 10% in a day, just out of the blue for no reason. And if that's on size, as a percent of your account, that's really hard emotionally to deal with your account fluctuation. So I think you're golden with that. And then with your own account, if you want to juice it up a little bit more, that's different. Like you said, you only have yourself to listen to, answer to, whereas it's outside money, outside clients, or yeah, I think you're doing everything exactly right.
Yeah, and I know O'Neill gives the guideline, like let's say ballpark, you have $100,000 account. I think he says 4, 5, 6 stocks, something like
Yeah.
that. You know better. I don't know exactly what it is, but
He
let's
was
say it's
really
five.
a five. In general, he would say people should have 5 to 8 stocks, and he was fine with people trading on margin if they've been, trading for
Yeah,
two,
so
3 years.
5 stocks on 100,000 or on 1,000 or whatever the number is 20% positions.
Yeah.
And if you're going to go up to 8, then you might be 150, 180% on margin. Again, that's an individual. That's an individual. I'm thinking of Warren Buffett's 2 rules of managing money. Rule number 1, don't lose people money. And rule number 2 is see rule number 1. So
Yeah.
you have to think of it from a, if you're for any, I don't know, most of the people are retail traders, but there are some people who run money and, invest for other people. And the whole point is you have to think of it from a perspective of, um, you want to stay longevity. You want to try to be consistent. And, I talked about podcasting when my producer says it's this, to be successful, you got to be consistent. It's the same thing in anything. Actually, it's funny. I saw a podcast not too long ago where they asked the guy define excellence. He said one word: consistency. That's it.
Wow.
And whether it's Michael Jordan consistently averaging 30 points a game over a 15, 20-year career, whether it's Druckenmiller consistently being positive, Paul Tudor Jones, 20, 30 years of consistently being positive, whatever it is that's going to make you the best. And I don't mean to digress, but from a money management perspective, you want to do well, but you also have to protect, because it's about longevity and consistently doing well for people. Peter Lynch, when he managed Magellan, I believe Fidelity had, so he managed, Fidelity Magellan's fund. For people who don't know, I believe Fidelity had a mandate in the mutual fund prospectus of no more than a 5% position. At the
Sounds
same
right.
time, I believe he was managing pension money for one of the big automakers, whether it was Ford or GM, I forget, and he didn't have the same restriction. So, as amazing as his numbers were for Magellan, he did better for I don't want to say a side thing, but he was managing money on the side for another thing. He did better because deep down inside, he's like, hey, you got to remember, he's 80s and 90s, Microsoft, Cisco. I'm sure he's one of the best fundamental people out there. I'm sure he's like, I want to take more than a 5% position in this. I can't over here, but this pension fund is allowing me to do that. And again, I might be screwing up the story, but you get I might not
No,
know
no,
all
that
these.
that sounds like that sounds very logical too.
Yeah. So his numbers were better because in things that he was really had conviction in, he could bump it up, let's say, to a 10% or whatever they allowed him there. So again, it really comes down to, is it for yourself? Is it for other people? And even if it's for yourself, just because it's for yourself, your goal still should be longevity. You don't want to be like I was when I first started trading, a boom and bust trader. That's the whole
Yeah.
thing, is a lot of people
Well,
go
it's
through
for
that.
all of us, man. We all start off like that. So
Yeah.
it's you
And
know
I still struggle with it. I mean, when you're on a good run and things are great, now I just call it my internal sentiment measure. And you have to
Hmm.
have that self awareness to recognize it. Meaning, when things are good and we're in a good power trend and things are clicking and breakouts are working, it doesn't matter if I'm blindfolded. I'm just like, stuff's working. I'm Steph Curry from half court. Everything's working. Everything's going in. Then I call it the internal sentiment measure, because I start to think about maybe making some excess purchases in my life,
Yeah.
or maybe some what's the economic principle, the higher your income, the more your demand for luxury goods goes up. I'm a pretty simple person. I'm not like that materialistic. I'm not looking to buy a $300,000 sports car. But if I'm like, hey, let me do this, or let me, pay off this, or, whatever, you start thinking of that, or you even start thinking you're really good and you're like God's gift to trading. That's when you have to catch yourself, cash out a little bit, and realize, okay, that line, stay humble, or else the market will conveniently find a way to humble you.
Yeah.
So that's how I deal with the highs, is just recognizing, okay, I'm not that good. Things are good. No, I don't need to buy that boat. Calm down and take some money off of the table.
That is so, dude, that is so true. I remember like Chuck and I would always talk about that during it was always the kiss of death when we were, I don't know, looking online to buy whatever, like
Yeah,
fill in the
whatever that
blank.
item is. Yeah.
And it is like, oh, okay, man, we're topping. It's
Cash
gonna be
out, cash out. But at
exactly.
the same time, I'm going to be honest, because a lot of people don't want to talk about their mistakes or talk about their struggles. I do struggle. I remember one time I tweeted out, I was looking at a stock. I was so pissed I didn't buy it, and it blasted off 30, 40%. And someone responded and said, wait a minute, you deal with this too? And I'm like, what do you think? Like, we're all human. I deal with this on a regular basis. And no one wants to talk about their struggles. And it's not me giving that impression. If people have that impression that I'm some perfect trader, I'm here to tell you I'm not. I struggle, and I'm being honest. There are times when, if I'm struggling forcing it or not doing well in a bad market, I've actually thought about like, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's where we're near lows as well. So that's the opposite of the
Hmm.
euphoria. What's the word I'm looking for? That internal sentiment measure. It's
Hmm.
also when I'm really thinking, I'm like, I might want to quit the business. Like, this really sucks. And I think ways to avoid that is to do a better job. Again, this is my own personal thing. When we're in those corrective environments, when it doesn't work, when it's struggling, when it's chop, when we're in bear markets, to really tone it down, if not take time off, so you don't have to hit rock bottom of like to the where you have those thoughts of like, I just want to quit the business.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And what you were saying about the person who said, "Oh, that happens to you too." Like it was so nice getting to work with so many great traders, and of course with Bill, and seeing how they could mess. And Bill specifically could just be off because we talk stocks all the time and decide which one we're going to put on our institutional list. And it was so nice to see how wrong he could be because then it was like, oh well, if he's wrong, right, and he's way up here, then all of us can be wrong too, and it's no big deal. And it puts it in a different place where you don't have to be perfect, and you're just playing the odds. You're just trying to get as much right as you possibly can, and get a little bit smarter each year.
Just
So for
a little
you,
bit
what?
better. That's
Go
right.
ahead.
A little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, so for you, what would you say is like your perfect entry? Like, let's say you're in that situation. You've been trading terribly for whatever reason, or the market's terrible. You're just off, and you're just saying, I want this fat pitch, this one specific thing. Would you say that that's more fundamentally based, technically based? The general market has to be there. Like, what in particular would be that perfect thing? You've been in cash, you're just waiting for that perfect trade. What does that setup look like to you?
For like an individual stock or just the overall picture of the markets?
Yeah, so for me, I'll just kind of answer it in a nutshell, and then I want you to just do a bigger thing. For me, it would be wait for the general market, the Nasdaq or the S&P's low to get back above the 21 days. So I've got the wind at the back there, and then I would be waiting for an upside reversal on a stock that is clearly up somewhere near its highs, within 15% of its highs, and then has an upside reversal, because then I have something to trade against it. It shouldn't go below the low of that upside reversal. So I have a natural stop in there versus an unnatural stop, which is just, one ATR or two ATRs or 7% or some sort of other thing. So that would be me. Like if like that would be my one perfect setup, like a perfect cup with handle with the shakeout in the handle with an upside reversal. And then I'm just, okay, I'm going to give this one a shot. This should work. That's me. What would be your perfect scenario? You're out of the market. You're wanting to get back in, but you really want the odds on your side. What are you looking for?
Um, I think the first thing is technical, but it usually coincides with some fundamental news.
Okay.
So I'll just use a recent example of, well, not super recent, but fairly recent with COVID. Um, I'd really like to see not only one follow through day because a lot of them can fail. I'd like to see two follow through days.
Hmm.
Ideally, one's days 4 through 7, another one on 7 through 10.
Hmm.
So I know the follow through day rules are one on days 4 through 10. I'd like to see, if not one on 4 through 10 and another one on day 11, 12, or 13, but ideally one on 4 through 7 and one on days 8 through 10, showing that within a short period of time there's like an insatiable demand from the institutions coming back in.
Yeah.
And yes, it's kind of like an overall puzzle to the big picture where, yes, I want to see the average, the indices get back above those key moving averages as well, preferably above if we're really down above the 21 day, but preferably above the 50. And then the most important part of that whole puzzle or picture is for stocks to set up. So during COVID, and I screen every night, I remember it was like late March, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of decent stocks looking good. This is March of 2020, and I'm looking through it, and I'm like, there's some cup and handles here.
Yeah.
And that's when I've contributed for
Mm.
Yahoo Finance, and I literally, I'm not saying this to brag, it's just documented that I wrote 2 articles. The first one was at the end of March, and it was titled "The Coronavirus Numbers Can Get Worse, but it doesn't mean the stock market has to get worse."
Well,
And
you nailed that, man.
I was basing that off of one thing and one thing only. I was screening, and there were a lot of good looking stocks. I followed it up in April 10th or 14th of that same, 2 weeks later, call it, basically with a follow up article. So the first one was because there were a lot of stocks looking great. The second one is because we had 2 follow through days and we regained the 21-day and the 50-day. So it was almost like stocks were looking good, and then the follow up was because more signs came in of the institutions coming back in. So that's all a technical picture, and it's funny because I remember it was one of like the higher read or clicked on articles on Yahoo Finance, and I was ridiculed like you wouldn't believe. Which I never mind
That's
that.
always a
That's
good
fine.
thing, actually.
What's that?
That's a good thing when you
Oh,
get
that's a great
ridiculed.
thing. I don't want
Oh
people
yeah.
agree. I don't want people agreeing with me.
Yep.
Because I
Absolutely.
get it. It's recency bias. We're all stuck at home. We're all watching the news and we're all going to die. And I'm not taking that. I'm talking from a market interpretation. I'm not taking what happened and taking that lightly. I'm just saying, okay, there's this and the news is miserable. And I get it. We're all stuck at home going stir crazy. But at the same time, from a market interpretation point of view, it's starting to look really good. And that's all I was saying. Like, yeah, the numbers are going to get worse, but the market doesn't have to get worse. Now, that's all the technicals that lined up.
Hmm.
And why did they line up? They lined up with the macro fundamental picture that was going on, which was 3 things specifically with the Fed, which goes back to Marty Zweig, don't fight the Fed, one of his top 5
Yep.
rules, is the Fed basically took interest rates down to zero. They said, we're not going to let a once in a century pandemic ruin the entire world. Whether you agree with it or not, look, they're there to, one of their mandates is stable prices. And when you drop 28% on the S&P, 33 on the Russell, whatever it was 25 to 35 on the major indices in 3 weeks. That's not stable pricing. That's panic, and the Fed wanted to try to do their best to stabilize that. So they take interest rates down to zero, basically. That produces an equity friendly environment. Number 2, we're going to increase our balance sheet. Number 3, we're going to buy bonds and stabilize interest rates, stabilize the short end of the curve, whatever they do. The point is, and what's amazing is, by the way, is they bought more bonds in 6 weeks off of the lows than they did in 9 years combined from 2009 to 2018.
Wow.
It's
Well,
amazing.
that
In
was such a
literally 6 weeks, they bought more treasuries because you saw their balance sheet went
yeah.
from 4 to 8 trillion. After the financial crisis from '09 to 18 and TARP and TALF and QE1 and TWIST and QE2 and all of those accommodative measures that they did of quantitative easing, they bought more in 6 weeks than they did in 9 years.
It's
So
crazy.
when they're pumping, and you don't have to be a macro nerd, you don't have to have an MBA, you don't have to have a PhD in anything. You just kind of have to follow what they're doing and just understand one simple concept. Yes, don't fight the Fed, but when they're providing liquidity, that's the fundamental thing going on. The institutions that are smarter than me, that have more resources, that have teams that comprehend all of this stuff, they start to put money to work. It shows up on the technicals. And that's when I did the follow-up article saying, okay, stocks were looking great. And it wasn't just DocuSign and Zoom and Coupa software and stuff that's work from home benefiting from the
Yeah.
pandemic. You had Netflix coming out of a 2-year base, you had Amazon, Nvidia, you had Seattle Genetics, DXCM, which is in glucose monitoring. So it
Yep.
wasn't just tech and work from home and stuff. It was mega caps, it was some biotech, it was some pharmaceuticals, it was some medical products. It was starting to spread out a little bit, and when all of those started to look good, and then you had just this insane like band-aid. It wasn't just a band-aid that the Fed put on the markets. Like I think even Steve Leisman on CNBC, he tipped his glasses to the edge of his nose. He's like, wait a minute, the Fed just did what? Like he was like,
I could see Steve doing that,
he
man.
like literally was like, they didn't just put a bazooka at the market, they brought the entire artillery. He was, even him, who's one of the top Fed watchers, was shocked at what they were doing. He's like, wait a minute, they just announced what? And
Well, more importantly than him being one of the top Fed watchers is what?
oh, he's a
He's a
huge
serious
Fed fan.
deadhead.
He's a great guitarist, by the way.
Oh,
I've
I
seen
thought he was a bass player. Oh, does he play
no, he
guitar?
plays guitar with
Oh,
a great band. I've seen him a couple of times in New York. I haven't seen him in a while because I haven't lived in New York in a while. But like, um, a lot, you would love him. Dead music, and it's just every. He's a great guitarist. Yeah,
yeah.
he might also play bass, but he's a great guitarist.
Okay, yeah. I thought he'd play, but yeah. Anyways, I didn't mean to
Anyways,
get off
we're
on that.
digressing. See, once we get to music, we'll start digressing. So where were we? What am I
So
looking for? It's sort of like that's an example of it's not one. If anyone can take one lesson away from this, it's not a magical indicator. It's not just like you flip a switch and it's red, green, and it's that simple. It's, I think even Scott O'Neill says there's an art to interpreting all this. If it was that easy, it'd be that easy. But if I know a bunch of follow through days, one of them fail, when you get two of them, that's going to increase your probabilities. And when you're back above the 21 day and above the 50 day and stock setting up, in this example, we had insane intervention from the Fed, but sometimes that's what it takes. A Fed cut might cause a follow through day, something like that. But the whole point is, I'm not really bogged down on the macro. And even if you didn't have the news on and you're oblivious to all of that stuff, all you have to know is if the technicals are improving, it's because the big institutions are coming into the markets. Let them interpret all the macro and all
Yep.
the data. And if it's good, then they're coming back in slowly into the markets for not 7 seconds for a trade, for probably the next 3 months to a year to 5 years is why they're putting money to work.
Well, you nailed that exactly right, and I love your thought process on that. Just a little tidbit on the multiple follow through days and how important that is, because it is very important. And that was a discovery that I made with Chuck and Justin when we were coming up with the market school rules. One of our key things was to figure out what was the percent needed for a follow through day. And that was a big debate within the firm. It was like, really hardcore debate, like gloves
Well,
are.
it was changed, right? From 1% to 1.4, 1.5, 1.7. It was changed like several times,
It
correct?
changed all the time. And what would happen is when we were waiting for a follow through day, Bill would call me up pre market and he'd say, Mike, write this down. And I get a little sticky out and you go, well, for the Dow, we need 2.2. And for NASDAQ, we need 1.7. And he would just give off these things out of his head. And as an OCD dude, like that drove me freaking crazy because I'm like, well, what happens if Bill isn't around? Like, and there's no one to call me to say what percent we need. So we did this big study, and without this turning into that, one of the things is we marked on any possible one because originally it was 1% back in the day that Bill had. And so we just did anything that qualified as a follow through day within the first 25 days. We just marked on 1.01% up to 3% or 4% or whatever they were. And it was funny when you just do original research, we sat there and stared at them. I was like, oh, well, the ones that work tend to have multiple follow through days, and the ones that don't only tend to have one in there. And then that became another rule within the market school rules of additional follow through days. So that was one of the discoveries we made. And it's, so you're absolutely right. Having more than one is very important. But what you said reminded me of something, so you wrote that back in the 2020 timeframe with a COVID, but recently, and I think it was on Cramer Friday or Thursday, where he mentioned one of your pieces that you had put out on the current market that I thought was fascinating. And for Jim Cramer, I know he gets a lot of flack. I love Jim Cramer. I think I would love to sit and have a glass of water with that dude and hang out because he seems super cool and super hardworking, and I really hate that people are anti him at times, and that's just not cool, man. I'm 100% on Jim's side of he looks at the market differently than I do, but man, that guy works hard and means well. But the piece that he was talking about, can you explain what that was when you came up with it, and just go through that whole thing, because I think it is very valuable.
No, I appreciate that. I have follow up questions before we get into that.
Sure.
When O'Neill would write down, we need to see 2.2, 1.7, did you ever ask how, where, what was, how did he come up with those numbers?
You see, my head is still on, right? No, dude, you don't ask Bill those
I
questions.
don't mean to be an ass and question him like, where are you coming up with that? Yeah, you know what? Like I'm you couldn't ask for like curiosity purposes.
No, because the no.
Okay.
So the way Bill was, without that turning into that's a big topic, and I want this to be about you.
we
So,
got we got time. Webby's got to ramble on here.
well, you know,
What's the long and short of it? Like you
so
just didn't want to lose your
the
job or
the
your head?
bottom line is Bill had this way of calculating things in his head, and he wasn't, a genius in that. He was just an average intelligence, frankly. But really, where he really exceeded were these things that really mattered in the market, like the ability to sit with a big position and let it bake and let it run, or really figure out what that leading stock was, and early on, and some magical things. And one of the things was his ability to figure out numbers based on just observation. So a little tidbit is he always had in his mind that the key relative strength number was 87 to 88, and that was just out of thin air of what was important to him. So in 2013, I did this monster study that really was a culmination of a 10-year project that I did, and it looked at every base, every single one from 1963 to 2013, and to figure out what was the important thing of what made bases work and what made them fail and everything in between. And the most important item was the relative strength rating by a country mile, and the inflection point on the chart. If I showed you the chart of like how the performance was, it was like with the low RSs, the performance was here, and then the inflection point was right at 87, which is where he said, and that type of stuff happened all the time, where he would just pull things out of thin air. I do a big study, and it was pretty much dead on. So I think what he was doing was had an average true range in his mind. He never used average true range at all. I don't even know if he knew what it was, frankly, because that just wasn't one of the things that he would use. But how much a stock or an index fluctuates on any given day. And I think he just had a running thing in his mind and saying, okay, well, NASDAQ fluctuates this much, so something abnormal would have to be 1.7, and the Dow is easier to get pushed around, and is price weighted only 30 stocks, so he wanted more,
Okay.
out of that one. So each one had its own reasoning behind it, but no, if you asked him that, it would be like questioning him. That wouldn't have gone over well,
Okay, so
man.
you're just kind of going with it's a lot of his own instincts from
Yeah.
experience and not like okay, but the rules 1, why are we looking for 2.2 or the rules 1.4, why are we looking for 1.7?
Yeah, so that's why the three of us, and I was really uncomfortable with that, and more so because I recognized at the time when we were doing that, and that was 2011 timeframe, that Bill wasn't always going to be around, and of course he passed away sadly on May 28th of 23. So we knew that he wasn't going to be with us forever. No one ever is, unfortunately, and so we had to figure these things out. So we did I mean,
Except Keith Richards.
Keith Richards, man. Keith Richards was around before Jesus was, man. He's been around forever and always will be. And so we figured out what the right numbers were. And but that was through a ton of work, and that's I've got a whole WeBBY rambles on that if people want to watch that, but I want this to be about you. So your piece that you did recently that Cramer talked about, let's go through that, and those key things that you brought up, and because it's a big deal, and yeah, tell everyone about it, and
So
few words.
it's actually ties in a little bit to what we were talking about. And before I forget with the follow through days, I didn't know you guys had that in market school with the 2 follow through days. It was
Mhm.
just my own observation of, so when someone asks you on a follow through day, like what's the percentage of them that fail? I don't even know. You know the studies. Like on one follow through day, what's the percentage of them?
Well, most of them fail. The numbers, we've gone back and forth on that. We spent hours and hours and hours and hours with that question, and it always came back to, well, what is your definition of failed? And we could never come up with a definition that we all agreed upon. So we have in Justin's spreadsheet like all these sliced a bunch of different ways, but the follow through does not work that well. It's in the same thing with base breakouts. Like most base breakouts fail. About 40 to 44% of them will work, and that's fine. And the same thing with the follow through days. There are less than 50% of them will work, and it just depends on your definition of it. But what it does is it gives you a line in the sand and an expectation. So if you have a follow through day, then one of the other things that we found was, rather than waiting until the low of the rally for you to exit, was the if you get a close below the low of your follow through day, that was significant enough to tell you that the follow through day most likely is going to fail.
Okay.
So you have a follow through day, and whatever that low is, you can go below it, but you can't close below it. And if you close below it, then really anything that I bought on the follow through day, I'm going to be backing away from. But our buy switch, our ability to still buy stocks, is still on. So then if it makes it back above the 21 day, or gets what we've called a subsequent follow through day, and you can have as many of those, most of the good rallies will have 3 4 of those, of the subsequent follow through days within that 25-day window
Yeah.
of time. But that close below the follow through day is really telling. So that is huge. Like his recognizing that follow through day thing, even though most of them fail, that's very important. And the same thing with a breakout, because you get a breakout and it should act a certain way. And then you've got, well, I had one of my last podcasts was on how to deal with a breakout failing. So even though most of them fail, you still have a true edge using a follow through day system as well as breakouts, because now you have something to sell against. Uh, Otherwise, you're coming down in a bear market, right? And where do you buy? Oh, it's just oversold. You're going to buy some, VIX spikes up. You're going to buy, or uh, you need something from a risk management. Now, it can be a moving average, it can be an upside reversal, it can be, you pick it. If I never knew about the follow through day system, I would use the low getting above the 21 day as my signal. But the follow through days typically happen before that, so it gives you an earlier entry. But that's a
Okay.
can of worms, man.
No, no. The reason I ask is and I love that explanation because I don't have the resources or even put the time into a bunch of studies or any of that stuff. But I just noticed in my own observations when we'd have one fall through day, I'm like, okay, dip your toe in the water, check out relative strength, stuff near the new high list, at least some merchandise that you can keep it light. But I just noticed on my own when we would have another one and getting above the 50-day and all that was, again, nothing's ever foolproof, but it was just a much, much higher probability. Going back to what I said about there's black and there's white and there's tons of gray
Yeah.
and everything we want to do is, again, you just have to accept so many people want a magical formula, a magical indicator. It's all about stacking the deck in your favor with higher probability situations. So it was just an observation for me, and
You're dead right, man.
I'm glad you kind of confirmed it with, some of the studies you have extensively done with all of the work, and how that leads into recently is we had one on April 22nd. And then, I was talking about days 4 through 7 and days 8 through 10. Ideally, the market doesn't care what I want. The market doesn't care what anyone wants. And that's a whole other lesson. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you have food to put on the table, kids to put through school, electric bills to pay. The market literally will chew you up and spit you out. So you always have to respect it. It doesn't care what you want. But also related to that
But it
is
should, Joe. It really should.
but what about my bills? It doesn't care. I'm sorry. It doesn't care about me or you.
I
And
would like to get a new guitar. Can it please go
aren't you
up
glad you're
tomorrow?
listening to this enlightening and encouraging podcast?
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean
Telling
to interrupt you, but I
telling
couldn't
people
help
the
it.
market hates you. It hates your guts. Um, but the reason I brought that up is okay, some people are like, I have to be so robotic and do exactly what like, stop it. The market's, it doesn't always repeat itself. It's going to rhyme. So I want one on 4s through 7 because that's what I want. And on ones on 8 through 10 because that's what I want. And that's what fits my narrative and makes me feel warm and fuzzy and great about the markets. Well, guess what? We didn't have one on 4 through 10. So does that mean you give up on the market? We're never going to get one. But we had two back to back on days 11 and 12. And then someone's like, well, we're supposed to get one on 4 through 10. Shut up and stop arguing with the markets. It's not going to be exact. You have to be able to bend the rules. You have to be able to be flexible. You have to be able to look at other factors that are going on.
Yeah, well,
And
we had some very successful follow through days. I don't remember off the top of my head what the dates were, but in the 20s,
yeah, I
where
remember August
you
of
had,
one year, it was a day 21 follow through day.
yeah, and
So
it is what it is,
this
man.
is
You
kind
just,
of a question I have for you, which I'm sure the
yeah,
people asked you this at the time. What if it isn't days 4 through 10? What do you
doesn't
tell
matter to
them?
me. Doesn't matter to me at all.
Okay.
I don't care. What happens is, um, Bill would say things either at a public event, or he'd put it in his paper, or somewhere, or in a book, and then people would take it like it's gospel. But Bill was a human, and he was changing all the time, and that would have been something that he would have said that market, like, oh, it's got to be between this and this, or it's got to be, and I found that with so many things that people would say, and I'd be like, no, Bill changed his mind on that 10 years ago, and so no, you want them closer to the bottom, because that shows that there's more power that's coming on early on, because you've hit a bottom. And why you're not buying on the bottom is because you want confirmation. That's what the follow through day is confirming that bottom. So the longer period of time between those, it's not really confirming it, right? Because if you're on day 21, it's not really confirming what happened 21 days ago. It's just you haven't gone lower, and now you have further strength that's going. So it's a little bit of a different animal. And that's why I lean more towards the 21 day, because by 21 days, when you get a follow through day, you should have been above your 21 day by that point if it's a healthy market. And so the 21 day is going to catch everything, but it's going to catch things late. That's why there's a combination, there's that combination of using your follow through day and the 21 day. And like what you were saying earlier, is the 50 day as well. That's very important. And that becomes
Yeah.
part of the power trend. But at minimum, that 21 day, if you're in like a serious bear market type of follow through. The other thing, and without getting off on huge tangents,
No,
is
let's keep tangenting. That's
okay.
fine.
Bill's original discovery for the follow through day was for bear markets, like real bear markets and bear market bottoms. Then what ended up happening is he boxed himself in a corner, because he wanted the newspaper's big picture to be writing about market tops, and he would use distribution. And he also noticed that at big market tops, you'd tend to have, back in the day, it was 5 days of distribution in a relatively short period of time, and then the market would roll over. The problem is, in between that, you have a lot between the top and the bottom. You've got a lot of time where you have heavy distribution. And he would start saying, well, if you have heavy distribution, you need a follow through day to reset it. So then,
Even out of
it,
a mild 8 to 10% correction, something like
dude,
that.
people started looking for it when you're down 3% off the highs,
Okay,
because you
even
had,
more, even less mild, like a 3 to 5% or
yeah, like
okay.
a nothing burger. And then that was mixing stuff. So it was an unintended consequence of him trying to do something good. But that's why we wanted to do the whole market school rules, where it's a plus one for this, a minus one for this, and trying to put all the pieces together from that robotic standpoint. But then there's an art standpoint that you put on top of it. So you have this. Okay, we're at a plus five. That means you're 100. You can go 100% in. But then, is there anything to buy? That's the art, that you were talking about earlier. So you do have to blend the two. But the follow through day is a big topic, man, and is very important. I'm not being down on it at all. I think it's one of Bill's best inventions that he came up with. But there's a certain context for it, and they should really be used more for bear markets than anything else. And all the everyone's using them all the time, and
Oh,
that's a
that's good to
whole
know.
thing.
I think you told me that too. It's a good reminder. It's mainly for bear markets. My whole thing is I'm not against them either. I'm just against it's just a kind of a pet peeve of mine of people who literally just either don't want to put in the work or don't want to think
Yeah.
and don't want to interpret the art of all of this. Maybe what's going on with the Fed, with the volume, with some institutions, with some stocks, with the moving averages. It is an art, and I love that. That's what makes it fascinating and absolutely. It's why I don't consider what I'm doing. They say do something you like, and it's not work or whatever. It's like you don't work another day in your life. Like I don't consider it work because I actually passionate about this. Too many people though are like, yeah, but what about this? It has to be this, has to be this, and I'm like, it's gonna throw curveballs at you sometime. Life's gonna throw curveballs at you sometime.
Dude,
So
yes.
when you don't get one on 4 through 10, and then you get one on days 11, and you're like, nope, that's not it. It's not what O'Neill says. I'm like, okay, Netflix is at a new high, Spotify's at a new high, the aerospace and defense ETF's at a new high. You gonna get your head out of your ass and look at that, or are you gonna say, what? It's not days 4 through 10. Like that's the pet peeve I have. So now it's turning into the market rant. Like it's sorry for the rant. It's just I don't like don't be so textbook all the time. Like you have to give it a little bit. Okay, it happened on day 11. All right, so your period was a day late. It still came. Like, oh yeah, you
You're
said you wanted
cracking
to
me
keep
up.
this. You said you wanted to keep this family. So sorry. Not anyways.
That's okay. That one we will let go. But I do want to keep it fair. I
All right.
I do want this to be something that well, God, well now it's so different what the kids watch on TV than what we grew up with. Everything we grew up with that was G and PG, and now like
I know.
kids in,
All right.
in elementary
I'll
school.
try to tone it down.
It's okay, man.
So
I'm
you
playing
get
with
the
it.
follow through days back on topic. You get the follow through days on days 11, and usually there's a little bit of digestion a couple of days and then maybe one on 14. It came April 22nd and 23rd literally back to back. So now you get two of them on days 11 and 12 and you regain the 21 day. That really really gets my attention. Another point I want to stress is I hate the expression stop trying to time the market. You can't try to time the market. I never I think of timing the market as you have to get the dead low and the dead high. I'm never claiming to
No
get
one gets
that,
that.
nor do I want to get that. I just want to say after the follow through days and you regain the 21 day, a potential power trend is starting where you really have a nice sweet spot of 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, whatever it is, of just a really nice uptrend. And that's when my tail starts to wag and I get excited that, we're starting to see parts of that art, parts of that puzzle, parts of that interpretation starting to form.
Yeah, well, I think what you said there just made me think of how smart Bill was to come up with the follow through day, because you said not trying to buy the bottom and not trying to sell the top. Because anyone who does that, and let's say you've done it once or twice,
Pure
you
luck.
got lucky. You just
Pure
got
luck.
lucky, man, because it's impossible, right? Because there's no signal that's going to get that. And what was, I think, genius on his part, certainly with the follow through day system, is he wasn't even trying to buy the bottom tick. And everyone is got their ego involved, and they will try to buy the bottom tick 15 times in a row and get their head handed to them. And then that last one, it works. And they're like, see, I got it. It was like, no, man, you got a whole bunch of other ones too. That doesn't work that way. Unless that's your system. If that's I don't like to put down anyone's system. If that works for them, then that's great. And the same thing with distribution. It wasn't really trying to catch the top. I was trying to catch the rounding of the market, like running out of steam. So I think his instincts of both of those, were so great, and it helps the rest of us of know where to go. It's like, oh, okay, well, the master was saying you don't try to buy the bottom. Everyone, don't catch a falling knife, all that stuff. And it gets you to think like, okay, the answer is somewhere after the bottom. Now, does it have to be the follow through day? No, it could be something else. For me, it's the 21 day. Like by definition, you're not going to get above your 21 day until you're off of the bottom. The only problem with that is it's a late signal, so you've got to figure out, because that pressure when you get the capitulation bottom and the 21 day is like a mile above you, and you're like, wow, if you're waiting for that, that's a lot of pressure building. And then sometimes you get up to the 21 day and then they crater for a little while before they go back up, and so that's a
Another
tough
thing
one.
I've found, which is again, all of these answers are, like I said, a lot of gray area, and the expression we talk about all the time: do what works for you.
Yeah.
I'm human, and I agree sometimes in a deeper correction, okay, the indices have really corrected a lot. Over time, they always come back, and you're human and you might have a little FOMO waiting for that follow through day when maybe you're like, okay, this is enough. I have found if you really want to cure the FOMO, I know FOMO is cured with discipline and all that stuff, but if you want to nibble on an index ETF after it's been beaten down, and you want to nibble because it helps cure a little bit of FOMO if you think things are going to snap back and you want to participate before a follow through day, and it's an index, like it's gonna come back if you're nibbling. I mean, if you dollar cost average after every 20% thing over every 10, 20, 30 year period, after every 20% decline, you'd be cleaning up if you did that with the SPY or the Qs or something. So I have found if you really do with a little bit, also the other factor before I forget is until stocks might set up again, because
Mhm.
things are so beaten down, so just all the garbage rallies off the lows. If you wanted to, you could nibble after a bigger correction on the indices. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I'm fine with that. With using ETFs to get in, and I use ETFs a lot. It is a big part of what I do, using the Qs, or SPY, or variations, or sector ETFs like SMHs and things like that.
Sure, sure.
But and I have positions in all of those as we speak right now. It's just for compliance reasons, it's June 29th, and I have positions in those three. But um
2025.
2025.
Because I hope people are watching this 3 years from now.
I hope so. My goal is actually for this to be for my kids and grandkids in decades from now. So yeah, so we got to include the year. The the thing I wanted to say that about those folks who are trying to be a robot, and it's fine if you want to try to be a robot. I built an algo before, and there's a huge advantage to having 100% black and white rules. That took me a couple years to build, of all of my time. It is very hard to do. But if you're trying to do that, don't try to do it because you think Bill was that way, because Bill wasn't. Bill would buy stuff before the follow through day. He would message out and try to teach people in a way to help most people. His mission was really to try to help the masses, the average person, become better off in life. And he was so successful, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that he helped, and some of them made them very wealthy, or gave them great careers and things. But he was not a robot, and he would buy things before the follow through day all the time, just not in big size, and we wouldn't make major changes because lots of times they wouldn't work. But he would buy a good setup. He wouldn't buy a random thing before a follow through. It would be like kind of a pet stock, that, not pet in a bad way, but one of his favorite fundamental stocks that was also technically
So
set
just
up.
dipping his toes in the water, so to speak, lighter
Yeah.
positions to get a feel if the markets might be warming up.
Yeah, and then there were times too where he was totally fine with us trading 12 stocks at a time. Like that wasn't a big deal for him. He was fine when I traded ETFs in with his account, except the first time I traded an ETF in the account was there weren't many ETFs at the time. It was just, I think, SPYs and Qs. And it was March of 2000, and I shorted SPYs in the top in March. And he said, or it was right after the top, and then it came back up and it was rolling again, and I did it. And he said, Mike, don't you know how to short an individual stock? And so I sold my short SPYs. They didn't have inverse at the time, and then I just sat out in cash. But I did the Qs and the SPYs on the short side of my personal account, and that worked out. But later on, he opened, once ETFs were more broad and weren't a new thing at that time, they were still relatively new. Then he opened up to it, and we put, like, I think we put BBH, which was the biotech ETF back in the day that we all gravitated towards, on our institutional list. So he was fine with the ETFs, and he wouldn't buy an ETF before a market turn, but he would buy an individual stock. But I will buy ETFs before, just for the reason that you're referring to, is like you've got this built-in diversification. So if you're in a bear market or a correction, like, things can get really ugly on an individual basis. But unless you're in a 1987 crash type of thing, on an index level, there's only so much they're going to go down, and you can get out very easily in after hours, pre-market, what have you. But you are procrastinating
Yeah,
answering the
sorry. No.
question.
All
I
right.
want to know about this great AI call that you have, because I read it. I think it's great, and I want everyone to hear about it. Jim
Okay.
Cramer
I know we
talked
could.
about it.
It's not procrastinating. We could just go off. I love it. We go off on tangents. So you have the follow through days and his wide breadth thrust. Basically, all of that means in late April are signs of the institutions coming back into the markets. And I have an educational product where I wrote for people. Basically, a lot of people didn't want to get back in or were just affected by the tariffs. So the whole point of the piece was, we're so bogged down in the short term stuff sometimes, and there's so much news and noise. And notice how news and noise not only have a lot of common letters and sounds the same, it's all junk. And my whole point was, we started a bull market powered by AI. You're going to have a lot of news and noise with tariffs, with the Fed, with geopolitical tensions. And the whole point of the piece was, which is why I titled it, Let's Not Lose Sight of the Bigger Picture. In my opinion, we started a new bull market in May of 2023. Some people say it started on the low of October of 2022. I don't really care. It's all semantics, whatever works. Around October of 2022, two things happened: was the actual low in the markets coming off of the 2022 bear market. And the second thing, it was around the time when ChatGPT started. So fine, call it that. For argument's sake, that's not what I'm here to argue. It's late 2022, early 2023, a new bull market emerged powered by AI. I'm saying May of 2023 because the true market leader, the true AI leader, NVIDIA, had a quarter that I don't think we will ever see again in the history of our lives. It was
Yeah.
the greatest quarter. You have 31 analysts expecting whatever it was, 6 billion. They're like, oh yeah, we just did 11.5 billion. And our guidance was like, whatever the numbers were so, the analysts were like, people who've like spent their whole lives following semis were just blown out of the water. So I'm saying it's when NVIDIA woke up the entire market to, like, yes, AI's been around for a while. It really launched, just like we had a low in October of 2002, and we really didn't get going until March of '03. It's a similar type of concept where you had the market low, but we really didn't launch until May of 2023 when NVIDIA announced that amazing quarter. So, and I wrote about it back then. And the analogy is, if this is going to be similar to the 95 to 99.com period, where the analogies are an invention or innovation that revolutionizes our lives throughout history. And again, you've studied this stuff way more than I have, but the general concept is, really strong, longer, powerful bull markets are driven by inventions. innovations, disruptions, like things that revolutionize and change our lives, whether it's the railroad. What did they change? You can get from New York to LA in, I don't know, maybe a few weeks or a few months rather than walking and having it take it 3 years. So railroads, airlines, PCs, drug discoveries, the smartphone, the internet, these major inventions have helped fuel bull markets. And what do they all have in common? Is they help increase productivity. So if the great bull market of the late 90s was from a new invention at the time, or that was really became more prevalent with the internet that helped increase productivity, the analogy is we could be in a bull market that started late 22, 23, could be a 5-year bull market driven by the current invention of the time, which is helping to increase productivity, which is artificial intelligence.
Well, I think that's great. I'm going to share, if you don't mind, where folks can find that. Just hold on. I'm not great at this, all this tech stuff. Um, Hopefully people can see this. So this is on a site. Where did you come up with that name? JoeFahmy.com.
Yeah,
That seems a little like
that
a
cool?
little
That's a cool name for a website.
like a little stretch. But here is your don't lose sight of the big picture column, and you got all this great stuff in there. And yeah,
Yeah.
I just
So if people watch, this is on the homepage now. If people watch this later on, they can click on the blog tab at the top and find it there. So at
okay.
least the
And
blog will take you to all of my blog posts in case if you watch this later on, I don't blog all the time, but it might be lower on, but it's called Don't Lose Sight of the Bigger Picture.
okay, and I love that. I didn't see this one. The Jesse Livermore's trading rules
We
written in
could do 10 we
1940.
could do a 10-hour podcast on
Oh
every
my
one of
God.
those rules.
I how I feel about Livermore. I mean, Livermore was the man. Like
Yeah.
he's the Robert Johnson of everything. Like, he is so important, and I'm not even exaggerating at all. Like if you haven't read Reminiscence of a Stock Operator and How to Trade in
How to
Stocks
trade in stocks, yeah.
multiple times, like I used to travel. Well, I still travel with it. When I got How to Trade in Stocks by Jesse Livermore in '97, from that moment on, I never went left home without it. I just felt like
I'm staring at the little paperback. It's over across on my shelf.
it's actually
No.
upstairs.
Oh, is it yeah, there? No, I'm staring at it in my place
Oh,
over
and you're okay, yes, because mine is
behind my computer over there. Yeah. Allie
yeah.
joked that this is the wallpaper around my entire house.
Is
she's
it?
like she's like, "Did you
You
wallpaper your entire house like that?" It's just a banner. But anyways, I thought that
you
was
need to have me over, and then I'm gonna check that out. Like, and I
no,
will do a
I'm
little like
not an egomaniac. My entire house is not joefahmy.com
you should
wallpaper.
have it above your bed.
That's what the disco
JoeFahmy.com.
ball's for. That's above the office. It's where I have the strobe lights and the disco ball. Anyways,
Well,
um,
I don't
how to
think
trade
people
in
know.
stocks. You were talking about that.
Oh yeah, how to trade in stocks. So I would travel with that. Whenever I got on a plane, that was with me because I don't know. It was like a security blanket. All the answers are in there now. I listen to it on audio, and anytime I'm traveling, even if it's just a little bit. And it's such a thin little book. And yeah,
It's great
I
stuff.
just it's everything you need to know is really in there, and then in charts, and like everything else you can figure out if you read those too. But I know with it's late on a Sunday, and you've got charts to go over and work to go, and I just wanted to thank you so much for
Oh
being
yeah,
on.
no, I wanted to make a quick point though about that piece
Sure.
because the most important part of the piece though is look, a couple of things. If I'm wrong, I don't care about being wrong. I don't have an ego. I
Yeah.
stop myself out. If I'm wrong, that's
Yeah.
fine. But the main thing is that I'm not saying bull market powered by AI, throw all risk out the window, throw all money management out the window, and just load up and just, I made the point that from 95 to 99, there were a lot of bumps, hiccups, pullbacks, corrections, nasty accelerated corrections along the way. 97, we had the Asian financial currency crisis. And then in 98 was the Russian debt crisis where long term capital blew up. And I remember a lot of those internet stocks. I remember being in eBay, and I don't want to say I'm embarrassed to admit this because I didn't know, but I was in it and it went to like, I don't know, 50 to like 200, and I rode it all the way down to 30 before it turned around and went to 300. So some of these internet stocks even got cut more than in half during the 98 pullback and correction in the summer. My point being that if this is going to go on, potentially a bull market that could last another 2 or 3 years, I'm telling you, I can't guarantee anything, but I can say with relative certainty we're going to have a lot of bumps along the way, corrections, and maybe the recent tariff pullback in March, April of 2025 is an example of that, where we almost dropped 20% intraday. We did. So I'm just saying, I want to stress the point that you still have to manage risk. And if it's going to be a longer term bull market, it's not going to be smooth sailing. And I'm not claiming it's going to be smooth sailing. That's why I said in there, we're going to see some major corrections and pullbacks along the way.
Well, just for the record, I'm in total agreement with you, and on this, the AI thing, in equating it to 90s, I think is the right analogy. And so I have studied the market historically quite a bit, and the one of the things that we did find was exactly what you're talking about, like the railroad stocks, and we studied all of them. That there were massive moves in there, and then it went on to the cars, and it went on, eventually it went on to the um, the airlines, and each one of those had follow-on sectors. So, for example, the easiest one to understand would be the airline. So, all of a sudden, you've got you can travel across the country, across the world in these airlines. So it changes so many things. Like now, you've got to have hotels, and you have to have restaurants next to the hotels, and then
Yeah.
entertainment, and then you would have bowling alleys and things. And so these things that just kind of had all these other industries go, and we don't know. Just like with the internet, at first it was the Ciscos of the world, like the backbone of it, or the software companies. But then eventually it translated into Amazon, and then eventually Google with search. So we don't know where this AI is going to take us. So of what that follow-on group is going to be, I think it's really going to help out. I mean, this is just doesn't matter what I think, but I think it's going to help out companies being just so much more efficient with supply chain management, inventory management, like just really knowing their customers and making sure that they have the right inventory. That's such a big deal for profits, and so I think it's really going to help make things more profitable, and then that will help earnings, which as like earnings drive everything, and so the earnings on the S&P go up. Then if the valuations stay the same, then the whole market goes up. And then when they're expanding, lots of times you get a PE expansion in there. So a 20 PE to a 25 PE is a big deal. Like so I think you're right, and also people should go back and study the 1990s, not just 95 forward, but focus on 95 forward, but study 1990 to March of 2000. I actually go all the way out to October of '02 and study that. And frankly, if you're hardcore, you should study it day by day. Like, I mean, not once. I mean, go through it bar by bar, maybe take a year, a week, and just say, okay, this week I'm going to study 1990, and then next week I'm going to
What do you
do.
mean I got to do work and put in time? What are you talking about?
Well, I think if people go into it, and this is what works for me, I don't know if this works for you, is when you do a change, when you look at a chart and you see something from 1995 to 2000, you see it and you're like, oh yeah, there's wiggles and wobbles, but it always goes higher. That's It gives you this false sense of security. But if you go day by day and you see how ugly it can be, and sometimes how unpredictable it can be, because it'll look set up and it fall apart, look terrible and go up. And you've got to get that ingrained in your mind, because as you said, you're going to get these, like the tariff tantrum. I consider that a bear market and a crash. Like everyone's not referring to it that way just because how the math kind of played out, but it felt like a crash to me, and it felt like a bear market to me.
It was definitely bear market activity.
Yeah. So But anyways, what is your thought on that? Is how should people actually go through with that in your mind? Let's just stipulate that you're right. I think you're right. That AI is the next big thing. I don't think you have people argue with that, and that we're in a 95 to 2000 type of time frame, or 95 to whatever. How should they capitalize on that? What would your advice be to them, if for someone who's willing to put in the work? What would you tell them to do?
As far as studying it, or what do you
Yes,
mean?
studying it to be able to capitalize. Like, so for me, my thing is, okay, if this is like the 90s or like the railroads, it's just so much easier to study the 90s and the railroads because it's very hard to get those charts, or the airlines, or the automobiles at the turn of this, like 100 years ago. What would you tell them to do so they're ready and they capitalize on this? It could be about studying the past. It could just be about how to treat the NVIDIAs of the world, or what advice would you want to leave people with on how they can get better?
It's such a loaded question. I mean, part of the reason behind my thesis is I'm also not a fan of trying to reinvent the wheel.
Hmm.
I just try to listen to people who are smarter than me, and that's a huge sample size, by the way. Um,
That's not true.
but you have people like Brad Gerstner who's saying AI is going to be bigger than the internet. You have Mark Andreessen, who I think it was in 2011 wrote why software will eat the world, or whatever that was titled, and he was just brilliant in that piece. He wrote another piece called Why AI Will Save the World. He wrote it like a year or two ago.
Hmm.
Just Google it. It's like a 27-page PDF for free. Like, people way smarter than me who understand this stuff, not just VC people, but who just understand the technology and what's going on. I pay attention to when smart people talk, and
So
because
you
they
don't
have
listen to me, is what
resources,
you're saying.
what's that?
So you don't listen when I talk, is what you're saying.
Exactly. That's why you've been a great mentor when you're talking and explaining all this stuff. It's like I want to take notes. I'm gonna have to go back and jot down notes on some of the things you talk about. Same thing when I watch. That's another great thing is when you explain the power trend on YouTube. It's like I've watched that video multiple times. Like, it's just, these are the things where you have to be humble enough to say, okay, there are people who are smarter than me or understand a concept. I want to get better, and take notes and learn it as best as you can. And I listen to a lot of smart people in interviews. Like I said, I've listened to 10 Druckenmiller interviews in the past, 6 months, and anything I can get at my hands on, because even if you get one thing out of it, some nuggets, this and that, to directly answer your question with AI, my whole thing, and that was the purpose of the piece, is like, you got to be open minded to this, because one of the lessons I've learned is moves in the markets go on much longer than we can expect in both directions. So just when you think something can't go higher, it usually does. Just when you think something can't go lower, it usually does. And for all the people who are like, yeah, but want to argue with this, I'm just saying, yes, we're going to have bumps along the way. The news is miserable. It's designed to be miserable because they want to sell ads to keep you tuned in for ratings. But if you have the mental capacity to just turn that off or not let it affect you so much and think of the bigger picture, they're great opportunities. And I think they're going to be even more, greater opportunities. To your point about, with airlines comes hotels and comes other restaurants and stuff. The clear other, whatever you want to call it, side effect or tertiary, whatever thing, is energy,
Hmm.
because AI is a huge demand on the grid. And it's estimated that it's going to go from 1% in data centers up to 8% of the entire energy grid. So clearly, those are other plays. And to think about outside the box, not only the utilities and the data centers, but the picks and shovels with a lot of these electronic parts and all of these, the list of companies, whether it's Celestica and Jabil and FN Fabrinet and all these names, they're not stock recommendations. They're at new highs, and they've made huge gains because they're going into some of the parts with AI. What about steel? As you're building, do you need a lot of steel to build these data centers, which are being built all over the country and all over the world? So that's where you have to, my advice would be, clearly stick with some of the winners if you can, but be open-minded to other factors, other growth areas, other not spin-offs, that's not the right word, but the side effects of the growth from AI. Just like you didn't need to necessarily invest in Apple, but if you invested in some of the chip companies that went in the iPhones and in the iPads, you have to be able to think outside the box. And I know it's a really big task to ask people to think and to put in work. I'm not saying that to be flippant or to be insulting, but unfortunately, most people just want to be like, just shut up and give me the stocks. Just shut up and spoon feed me the stocks. That's not going to help you at all. I'll tell you
Yeah.
another quick story. I always followed Ken Hebner, who I know was a CGM focus fund, and he was a
Yeah.
client of
Bill
you
was a
guys.
big fan. He'd get hot and cold, but he was a huge, they were friends and he was a client of ours and Bill spoke so highly of
Oh,
him.
loved him. He did not, he had self admitted he didn't understand tech so well, but with industrial and oil and gas and energy and all of those, like he was hardcore, really, really good at that stuff. And I used to love to follow what he did. There's two problems with it is when you get the 13F filing, it's 45 days after the end of the quarter of what he was doing. And he was called Machine Gun Ken for a reason because
Yeah.
sometimes he would blow out of positions like in the middle of the quarter. So if you have to wait for what he did on January 1 to March 31st, and you have to wait 45 days after the quarter till what is that, May 15th, not only you're getting it very late, he might not still be in those positions. So that's the example of relying on someone else. And I couldn't wait till his filing dropped because I wanted to know he ran a great about 20 stock
Yeah.
concentrated portfolio. And I always wanted to know what he was doing. The second problem, besides the first one, it's being late, is the second problem is what happens if he retires? And you're relying on anyone, for stock picks or for when people, the reason I thought about that is people are like, oh, just shut up and make me a bicycle clown. Just give me some stock picks. I don't want to care. What if the person or the service or the whatever group you're relying on retires or stops doing that? Then you're stuck. That's why it comes back to about you have to be able to think on your own. You have to be able to do some work. You have to be able to make decisions. I would say, and I've been honored to be a guest on IBD Live, and I can see a lot of the
We
questions.
love having you on, by the
No, I
way. We
love being
love
on,
it.
and it's always fun. I would say 90% of the questions are just people, what do you think of this stock? What do you think of X? I can't even say XYZ anymore because this Square changed this.
They ruined it for us,
They
man.
ruined it for us. What do you think of fill in the blank stock? Or what about this? What about this? There's no real question. 90% of the reason they're asking that question is because they're in it.
Yeah.
I mean, why would I ask you, Mike, hey, what do you think of ExxonMobil? I don't care. I don't own it. So I'm not going to ask you about it. But what do I think of this stock? It's probably because I own it. And I'm not making fun of that. I'm trying to encourage people to get better and think on their own, meaning on IBD Live, and the questions are great and the audience is great. I'm not making fun of that. I'm just saying the majority of the questions are just simply, what do you think of this stock? Because they're in it and they want comfort. That's it.
Yeah.
I used to be the same way, so I'm not being critical. I used to admit I used to want to know what other managers were buying because it was so important to me. And eventually you have to mature to the point where, of course, I'll listen to what people have to say. Paul Tudor Jones, Tepper, they're on TV. They understand amazing big macro pictures and they're always right, or they seem to always be right. Of course, I want to listen, but I want to listen to what a big money manager is buying in their filings. But at the end of the day, I'll listen to all of that. But you have to be able to make your own decisions and think on your own and rely on yourself, because if eventually something goes away, then you're screwed. So you have to be able to be self reliant on being able to do some of the work on your own and making some of the decisions based on some of these basics. Also, before I forget, another thing when we're talking about ETFs, people don't have to feel the pressure of you only have to own individual stocks. You can
Yeah.
have a blend. It's okay to have a blend, especially if you are new to trading, you're retired and you don't want to follow tons of stocks all day. It's overwhelming for you. You can own some ETFs and own 3, 4, 5 stocks just to at least have a feel for the market and maybe get involved in some great companies, but don't feel like your entire portfolio has to be individual stocks as well.
Yeah, most of my the majority of my account at this moment in time is in ETFs,
Okay.
over individual stocks, which is a bit rare for me, but there's reasons for that. But man, I'm just waiting to disagree with you on something, and I agree with everything you say. It sounds like a cop out of, oh, I agree with you, but I really do. Maybe that's why we're friends and we get along, because there's a confirmation bias.
We
But
disagree on volume, but we can fight about that anytime you
it's
want.
okay because I'm right and you're wrong. So that's we can move on.
All right, so we just move on. Next topic. Check.
Okay, who's better, the Beatles or Zeppelin? Let's see.
Zeppelin, in my opinion.
Okay, there you see. We agree on
But
everything
it's
else.
also more recent for, I mean, I'm 108 years old for people who wanted to know, but I didn't really grow up in that era of the Beatles. So I grew up a little bit more listening to Zeppelin.
Yeah, well, the Beatles were great, but I mean,
I mean,
they
the
don't.
Beatles, Stones, and Zeppelin are constantly listed as the top in most people's top three just because of either their music or the influence on the culture and so forth, or
Oh, now,
longevity.
now we're gonna have to go with Stones or Zeppelin. That is they're
Oh, yeah, I'll
so
ask you
different.
that. Stones or Zeppelin?
I have to do Zeppelin, but man, that's hard because you can make a solid argument for the Stones because they were around before and after and continued putting out music. And Robert Plant won't do a Led Zeppelin reunion tour, so everyone. You've got to know someone who knows him. Please tell him that there's some random dude out in Austin who's really mad at him for not doing a reunion tour.
I
I did
don't
see.
know. I,
Someone
I
who
I
knows
know a
him.
lot of people, and I'm very blessed and lucky. I don't know anybody in the Zeppelin camp, but I know people who would know. But if I need to get a message to Jimmy Page, I'm not like gonna be like, dude, get together again. Like, I
Oh
don't,
no, I think Jimmy Page would do it in a heartbeat because I saw him with the Black Crows in '99 at the Greek when the Black Crows were all playing Zeppelin music for the most part, and he looked so happy. It was one of my favorite concerts ever. He looked so happy. And I saw the Page and Plant tour when they got back together. I think it was '94 and '95, and that was really really good. And they just, man, they could do it. Anyways, that's music, and we're not there yet. We're almost there. So I wanted to ask you, what other advice would you give um, to folks out there? From your style, you've got your way of looking at things, or what would or let me just ask you, because people probably don't know you. What do you have? You have your. Will you tell people what do you have that can help people out?
um,
Meaning
I
like your
try to.
RIA stuff and
Oh,
your
that
service
stuff.
and that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, behind me, Zor Capital is an RA registered investment advisor. We've managed accounts for high net worth individuals. I've been doing that for a while. I love it. For people who might want help with money management, some people like to do it on their own, or they work at a fund and they just want access to the research, which is my educational product at joefahmy.com. I've been doing that over 5 years, put out content 2 to 3 times a week. I love it. It keeps me on the markets, keeps me sharp. I've been very blessed that, um, people have. Usually when you write to something or have a note, it's a complaint. And I've been getting unsolicited emails that are great. Like you don't
Oh,
call
that's
Delta and
wonderful.
say, "Hey, thanks for arriving early and for my bags being on time." People call when there's a complaint. I'm beyond humbled and grateful that I get unsolicited emails from people saying they really, I really help them, process and think through ways of looking at the markets. I could simplify it in just figure out the direction of the market. I try to keep people on the right side of the market. When it's healthy, let's get involved in some strong fundamental stocks or ETFs. If an entire sector is strong and you don't want to deal with single stock risk or don't know what stock to pick, you can use the sector ETFs as well. Use the technicals for your entry points and then manage your trades as best as possible. That last part is where it involves confidence. It involves being calm. It involves, building your strength as a trader, meaning managing your trades, when to take profits, where to stop yourself out. I don't tell people where to do it. I give guidance, but you can't tell Warren Buffett to put a $5 stop on a stock that he might be buying more and holding for 5 years.
Yeah.
You can't tell a day trader to put a $5 stop because he might want to have a 50 cent or a dollar stop. So that's where everyone should know their own time frame and their own style. And I'm very lucky I have people all sorts of different experience and different time frames, and encourage them based on your situation to make decisions. Because at the end of the day, if you're unsure, start small. Even if, like I said, you're not sure about buying 100 shares, maybe buy 10. Work on building that decision making muscle. Same thing on the way out. If you got 100 shares and you're not sure what to do, you can sell 50. Nothing wrong with that. At least if it goes up, you still have some. If it pulls back, you don't get hit as bad. So trying to encourage people with these types of strategies to help improve their trading and their investing.
Well, of everything you said, what I'm loving, because I hear you say it all the time, is to know your time frame, and that's so important. In your analogy there with a $5 stop for Buffett versus a day trader that's a great way of putting it. And if I steal it from you, I'm telling you now that it's not intentional.
No,
I
please.
will.
I've stolen a lot of stuff from you, so go right
It's
ahead.
okay. I will credit you if I remember, but that is such a great way of looking at it and explaining it, because if I think in terms of swing trading and position trading. Swing trading, buying it for days to weeks, and position trading weeks to months or longer. And there's different styles for both of those. So when I'm swing trading, I'm like buying something. If it doesn't do what I expected, I'm out of it, by 3%. Lots of times before that, if it gets away from me, maybe 4 or 5%. And people are like, "Why are you selling it there?" Well, that's from a position trading standpoint. It's doing nothing wrong, but from a swing trading standpoint, it is. And as well as, like, if you were day trading, which I have nothing against, it's just, then it's a whole different level. So it's that time frame, um, in being specific to your style, is so very important. And I'm wondering, for you, for your personal style, let's say more from a position trading standpoint, where do you like to take your profits? Like, is it is it a set percent? Is it an amount?
It depends. Again, the answer is it depends. The reason I brought that up is that I might take a half position on something that I have done a fundamental deep dive into that I like longer term.
Okay.
And I buy the stock, it pulls back to the 50-day, it's down 7 or 10%. I know losers, average losers, and all this stuff. I might like the name, and I only took a half position with the intention of I'm buying more. So I'll buy more, and someone's like, well, O'Neill would say to stop yourself out. Of course I respect O'Neill. He's changed my life and yours as well. Like, that's not the point. It's not disrespect. But if he told me to jump off a bridge, I wouldn't do that. So my point is, you have to be able, just like I respect Druckenmiller or any of these people, insert hero or market wizard, whatever, I will listen, but you have to have your own personality.
Hmm.
So I might like something, so I might add to it at support. Of course, I'll still have a stop. I'm not going to hold on to it forever. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I might bend the rules a little bit. On the upside, I might take profits at 20%, but let's say it shoots up 20%. The O'Neill 8-week rule of basically, if you get a really, really strong, powerful gain really fast, stick with it for a bigger gain. Again, that doesn't, maybe for that stock, you can't go broke taking a profit. Maybe I just have some bills to pay and I want to take whatever the reason is. I
Yeah.
just feel like selling it up 20%. So my point is, I use the blueprint of a lot of the rules, but I contour them to my own personality. That's basically what I'm trying to encourage people to do. Whether it's a quicker stop and whether it's a quicker gain, you can do whatever you want. With me, what I shoot for, I say it depends on, with high tight flags, and if I'm lucky to maybe identify one or whatever, I found myself, or a first stage base coming out of a brutal bear market, and it's a new bull market. I found myself saying, if I shoot for 20%, I find myself saying, well, I think this thing has, based on the blueprint and the studies of big winners, this thing could double, maybe even more from here. Especially with a high tight flag, if it could double up 100% in 3 or 4 months, I found myself taking the gains too soon on some of those based on the situation of the markets. I've also, in a choppier range bound market, if I get a 10% gain, I might just say I'll take it and run. So ideally, coming out of a nice cup with handle, trying to get those 20 percenters, ideally, but I also need a couple of 30, 40 or more to offset a boatload of 5 to 10% losses. So I try to get those with something that's either a high tight flag, or that I might just have more conviction in, or that I like for the next 3 to 5 years, like a retailer building out and doubling their stores in the next few years. So I might play it out for a bigger move. It doesn't mean I'm going to hold it for 3 years, but I might go for a bigger move. So again, the art of, it's not avoiding the question, is it's the art of, it just depends on the situation in the stock.
No, I think that's a fair answer, because lots of things really do depend on, and it also, it'll depend on which account it is that you're running. Like, I'm sure, like, you're probably like me and like most people, like, I've got a trading account, a like kind of a fast, more swing trading account, and I've got some retirement accounts, and I treat each one, you know,
Yes, that's another
differently.
factor as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
And going back to what, kind of the theme of, not following people, people change too, whether it was Stanley or Paul Tudor Jones or anyone, they change depending on, they were different than they were back in 1987 than they are now. And I witnessed that with Bill. Plus I spent a lot of years going back and studying all of his stuff in great detail of how he traded throughout the decades. And how he traded in like 1962 was different than 1968, and that was different than 1978, and then that 78 was different than 82, and
Yeah,
certainly different than 91. And then 2002 was different than how he traded in 2008 and 9, like, or 2009. Like, he was morphing. And so when people are like, well, Bill wouldn't do that, well, unless it was, Bill would not average down. That just was one of the things he wouldn't do, and he wouldn't let something go more than 7% against him. But all the other things really morphed over the years, and they would, it, it just depended, like you said, it depended on a lot of things. He was running the him and all the PMs were running the capital of the overall firm, both the institutional side as well as IBD, and what was Daily Graphs, which is now Market Surge. And so that was a lot of risk. And so if the firm wasn't doing well, then he would trade differently. If the firm was doing well, the businesses were doing well, then he had more leeway to push it. And it's just like anyone else in life. If you're doing well financially at the time, you can take different risk. If you've got some things that aren't going your way at the time, you've got to dial the risk back. So I think it's very fair to say it depends, because it really does.
yeah. And if he or anyone else, like I said, insert my heroes, market wizards, the best of all time, all that stuff, whatever these people, like insert names, have hardcore rules, I respect that. I'm not arguing with them. I'm not trying to be combative. I'm not trying to disrespect any of that stuff. I'm just encouraging people. I still have a stop. It might be a little bit different. I still might have a target, might be a little bit different, all of that stuff. I know Paul Tudor Jones tries to get 5R on almost all of his trades. It's like, risk $1 to make 5. I wish I had that talent. I wish I could do that. He's also maybe playing it out for a different move. And he also is not going to get that on every single trade. That's what he tries to shoot for. My point is, everybody's different. As long as the concepts and the blueprints of risk management and all of that stuff is similar, I think you have to adapt to what fits your personality, your risk tolerance. If you can watch the market closely, some people are trading full time, some people are working full time, where they might be able to pop in during, lunch on the market. Some people are retired and don't want to be, a slave to their computers all day. And they're like, I might want to go out for a walk or go, like, all of these things are part of the equation for you figuring out what works for you, and because it depends on your situation.
Well, that's great. Well, I know we've been going almost 2 hours, so, and
All
you've
right.
got work to do. So
I know we could ramble on forever. Thank
I'm
you.
not letting you. I'm not letting you out of the music question. But before that music question, and you're fine saying reminiscence or how to trade in stocks if you want to pick the right answer. But what would you say would be your books that everyone should read?
I'm a big fan of Battle for Investment Survival.
Okay, that was one of
Gerald
Bill's
Loeb.
favorites too.
I'm a big fan of the O'Neill How to Make Money in Stocks, fourth edition, orange cover. I think it's the. I'm not just saying this because you were involved in it and he was your mentor and all that. It's the greatest lesson in technical analysis I think you can get going
I
through those
agree.
first 100
Yeah,
pages, where your team marked up everything, annotated everything, buy points, sell points, blow off moves, base failures, where to stop yourself out, maybe to take some profits, where to add longer term to stuff. If you really study those 100 pages, when you're going to bed at night, just to like go look, just try to develop a photographic memory, study one or two or three of those charts and go over them and over them and over them, because as they say, history doesn't always repeat itself, it tends to rhyme. A lot of these patterns tend to rhyme with the old winners from the early 1900s to today. So I would say go through that. And of course, the Livermore stuff. There's tons and tons of books out there. I'm just a fan of some of the hardcore, like 4 or 5 like staple books, and reading them over and over to ingrain. There's so much content in these books, you need to ingrain those principles as best as you can by repetition is the mother of skill. How do you know song lyrics? Because you didn't hear the song once, you heard the song 100 times, and then it comes on 20 years later and you're still singing the tune. So you
that's
need to
true.
repeat some of this concept, the content over and over. So I kind of stick with some of those core books.
Well, those are all great books. And your point about the how to make money in stocks, the charts in the beginning. What I would suggest people do is, if you can get a hold of a PDF version, do that. But if you can't, um, either just take a picture with your phone or scan it in on a scanner or something like that, and then have it on your computer. And really, you can zoom in on it. It's a lot easier that way than just looking in the small little book. But that is just when he was putting that in there, he was getting a lot of flack of putting it in the front because that was unheard of. Like if people don't know what we're talking about, how to make money in stocks, by the time he got to that edition, the last edition that he did, he wanted to put all the model book stocks in the front, which is something
Yeah.
that I had a lot to do with. And it was so controversial because it made no sense to start off a book with 100 pages of charts. And I was like really like 100% on board. It was like me and Bill against the world, which would happen often. I'm sure there were other people who were agreeing, but a lot of people didn't want that. And
They
I think
wanted it more like
it's
an appendix at the end,
yeah,
right?
the appendix where it would normally be, or somewhere in the middle of it. And he really wanted to make a statement of like, this is the answer. Like, look here, I'm giving it to you, and
It's a heck of a statement, and I honestly, I say this as honestly as I can. Like, it's just the best lesson in technical analysis. I don't care what anyone tells me.
I agree. I
You
agree
know,
with you. And I
for
separate the
like
fact
10
that I
or
was so
15 bucks, like it's literally free. It's
yeah.
invaluable for what you're getting. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just have to separate out that I was involved with that and
Well,
had
that's
a
why I'm
lot to
not
do with it.
saying this because you're
But
in front of me and,
yeah.
and talking to you. I've said this on my own webinars and in talks I've given when you're not around. So
Yeah, no, I
it just
appreciate that, but I agree with you that in his book, the Livermore books. And what are your thoughts on? I love the Market Wizards. I listen to them on
oh yeah.
audio, like on loop. Do you dig those?
I love the market. Yeah, I left out some of Victor Sparandeo's books with market timing are great. Market Wizards, again, that expression, success leaves clues.
Yeah,
Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Find someone who's successful at a style that you like and learn from them with their blueprint and contour them and conform it to your own personality. Peter Lynch is amazing with fundamentals. Warren Buffett with with value and so forth. I mean, there's just I love reading, and I know those two are not in Market Wizards, but my point is I love finding traders, whether it's Ed Secoda and the original Market Wizards and Paul
oh,
Tudor Jones and some of those interviews, finding someone with a similar personality. And even if they trade commodities and you don't trade commodities, you can still learn a little bit of tidbits and nuggets from the way a trader does something differently. So
Yeah, wasn't it
it's
wasn't Ed's line in there? I hope I'm not getting this wrong. It is like every trader gets out of the market what he wants or
yep.
he truly wants, and that's I knew a PM.
That's a deep concept, by the
It
way, which
really
we could spend an hour talking about. But
it is really deep. A PM that I used to work with at O'Neill went up and spent a couple days up at his place when I think he's out in Texas now, but at the time I think he was up in Lake Tahoe, and he went on and on about how informative that their meeting was, and he got to stay at his house and everything. And I'm very envious. I've never even met Ed. I would love to meet
I
Ed.
haven't either.
Yeah, he's like, dude, the Whipsaw song and everything, man. That guy's cool. Okay, so we are going to, unless you have anything else to say, because I
I
know
got a
you got
million
charts
things
to
to
look
say,
at.
but we got to wind this down. We can do a part two another time, just
Can
like
we?
you're going to be on my podcast again
I
too.
can't wait to do and tell your producer there that he just does a bang up job. I mean, he and is such a kind guy, and I really appreciated the time that he spent um, talking to us.
No, thank you. He's great. He's great.
What what a nice guy. So we've procrastinated enough. The most important part of this entire the Hangout series of the Webby Rambles On are these two questions. Every guest, if you're going to be a guest on here, and I'm recording a few more this week with some guests I'm really excited about. Super excited to have you on. Um, is the same question. So, your favorite live album. Now, I'm going to set this up because I'm a little bit of a geek and I've got some OCD issues. And so, like, sometimes I'll just listen to, I don't really have it, but I just say that, but I'm weird that I will listen to something I like for until I get sick of it. I will listen to it. I've listened to albums for an entire year. One was Eric Clapton's From the Cradle, and I listened to it for a year, and I started getting sick of it, and I had to put it on the shelf. I did the same thing with Led Zeppelin or Led Zeppelin number 4. I had to put that on the shelf because I was listening to it so much. I'm like, I don't want to get sick of Stairway, and so you can only listen to these two albums for an entire year, and you're on the honor system. So one live album and then one studio album, but it can't not be a best of, but it can be a double album. So you go. What are your answers?
Live album, I had a lot of trouble coming up with. I remember growing up with AC/DC live in Donington,
Oh, was that 92?
91, 92 ish.
Okay,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
that was a good.
Um, I would just say that I'm just a huge AC/DC was the first concert I ever went to. So Fly on the Wall tour, 1983, I believe.
Okay,
Um,
Fly on the Wall was recently. I just saw it was
or
an
maybe it's 80
anniversary
something.
of that coming out or something recently. People don't like Fly on the Wall. Fly on the Wall is one of their best albums, totally underrated. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, maybe it was in 83, but it was in the 80s. First concert. I didn't know about For Those About to Rock. At the end of every
Mm.
AC/DC concert, they end with For Those About to Rock. And it was the old Boston Garden, which has a balcony that it's actually was originally built for boxing, where they had the balcony overhang so you could watch boxing.
Oh
And then
wow.
the Bruins and Celtics played there, and they had obstructed view seats, when you'd sit behind a big pole and pay like a few bucks, and it was obstructed view, so you could kind of catch part of the game from different angles. Anyways, it was a balcony overhang. So I'm on the balcony, and all of a sudden these cannons came up, and I was like, "What is that?" I had no idea, and they just like blew up. Like I wasn't that far away from them. I
It's
think I
an
was down
experience,
for like
right?
2 or 3 days. Sorry, what'd you say?
No, it's such an experience with the cannons. And did they have blow up dolls and
They
anything
didn't
else at
have
that one?
those. It was before a whole lot of Rosie and all that, but
Okay.
or I think it was. No, maybe it wasn't below before that, but they didn't have that. And it was, they didn't have elaborate high tech video screens and stuff, but the cannons that went up, and I literally was deaf for 2 or 3 days, but I was like a teenager and loving life, and it was my first concert, so I would have to lean from a sentimental and nostalgia. I'd have to lean to an ACDC. Live at Donington, I would say would be my choice.
Okay, we need to go see them together. I know you've offered, and somehow I just couldn't make it out there. But we need to see them. I have not.
You're in Europe for another month. If you, I wish I could get away, but if you pushed me, I probably would.
I can't do that time zone and trade and work at the same time. But
I
when they're
think
back in
Europe's a
the States,
great time zone for trading. It's like roughly 3 to 11, Eastern. I think it's
yeah.
great.
But I'm a morning person, man. Like I'm good with waking up super
I think the
early.
West Coast or Europe are the best trading hours. East Coast hours suck, in my opinion. But
Yeah, I don't. I like. Yeah, I like the
I'd rather
West
get it
Coast.
out of the way and have the whole day, or hang out all day and trade at night, and then whatever, go drinking and enjoy yourself, and wake up at the crack of noon the next day.
Yeah, I was in London in I think 2012, and I remember trading out there, and I just like
You
couldn't,
didn't
man.
like it?
I loved London. We
No, I
actually
meant you didn't like the trading hours.
no, not at all,
Oh,
man. I'm a morning person. I get tired early because I'm an old dude. I'm ancient, man. I'm like I'm so okay. So that was a really good pick, and um and I think I have that on. I might have that on DVD actually. Um, but that shows how old I am to have DVDs, and I don't even have a
well, you didn't
DVD
say
player.
8-track. You're not that old.
Well, my sister Sherry had an 8-track player in her first Bronco.
Yep.
That was a cool car. Okay, so that is your live album. So now your studio album. Now remember, it can be a double album if you want.
I'm going Michael Jackson Thriller.
Oh, good call. Good
That's
call
what I'm going with.
because Eddie's on there. That's why.
It's the greatest selling album of all time. I have a theory that if you listen to Michael Jackson for more than 5 to 10 minutes and you're not in a good mood, you're really just dead on the inside. I don't care if you're young, old, black, white, it doesn't matter. I just have a theory. There's a theory of like, if you want to be in a good mood, listen to music about 7 minutes to
Hmm.
music that you like, and it'll put you in a good mood. I personally, and again, this is the old do what works for you. Some people hate Michael Jackson, some people hate rock, some people love, some I don't care. I'm just saying my theory is if you're not in a good mood after 5 or 10 minutes of listening to Michael Jackson, then I can't help you.
You are dead right. So I'm going to do a little thing. I've got Thriller up, and I do remember my parents bought my sister and I the Thriller album. They also bought us the Grease album for us, and we geeked out on it and dug it. And that was before I realized, that Eddie uh, played on it and didn't get paid and all that good stuff.
And
So
rewrote that whole song from Michael Jackson.
yeah, so tell us about that.
I don't know the details. It's on YouTube, but he basically was supposed to just do the guitar part, but because he's such a musical genius, he actually rearranged some parts and rewrote the whole song. Is the gist of the story.
Yeah, and I think David Lee Roth was mad at him for doing that, and David could go jump off a. Anyways, all right. So we are going to go through, and your job is going to be to pick. Don't tell me your favorite song on it. We're going to do it by process of elimination. So I'm going to give you a few at a time from the beginning of it. So of these three, what is your favorite? Want to be started something? Baby Be Mine, or The Girl Is Mine with Paul McCartney.
I'd say want to be starting something.
Of course. Yeah, right. Okay. Now, Thriller, Beat It, or Billie Jean. Man, they
Oh my
put the best
God.
ones all right in the middle.
Oh my God.
Thriller,
That's
Beat It, or Billie Jean.
well, Thriller is awesome, and I love the video, and I can still do the Thriller dance, which one of these days I'll have to do for everybody.
Oh, you can do that one?
I,
For real?
I used to know. I used to know how to do the Thriller
Oh
dance.
my God. I don't know how to dance. I'm like the typical white dude who can't dance.
Yeah, no,
Wow,
just
you can
with all
dance?
the zombies and clapping your hands above your head and all the shaking. I used to love that. I mean, you're picking like three of like that's it's nearly impossible.
Okay,
Um,
I will narrow it down. We'll circle back to those. Think about those. And oh,
okay,
speaking of Thriller, I've got the shirt that I bought, the Mammoth shirt that when you took me to go see Mammoth, Eddie's son, Wolfie, um, play, and we got to hang out with Frank, who you had on your podcast last week, who's the guitar. Well, tell them about Frank.
Frank Sidoris is an amazing guitarist, a business owner, kind soul. Just I can't say enough great things about him. He's worked with Slash and currently works with Slash and is best friends with Wolfgang Van Halen, who we refer to as Wolfie, and plays in Mammoth in his album. Wolfgang Van Halen is when people underestimate and they say, oh, yeah, just a last name and this and that. He is literally a musical genius. He's recorded his albums. He goes into the studio, does the bass, does the drums, does the guitar, does the vocals, does the keyboards, records every track on his own. I guess when you have a name like Wolfgang, I hope you're good at music. But people don't realize he records all the tracks by himself, and he's an incredible musician. And Frank plays guitar in his band as well. So
Well, and you were so nice to make that, you and Frank, to make that meeting happen, which just, man, it made me so happy. I cannot
puts a
tell you.
smile on my face, brother.
Dude, it just was so nice that both of them took the time out to, the Frank hung out with us, which was super cool, and couldn't be a nicer guy. And he's agreed to be on this podcast. I can't wait
Yeah.
when he has time. But then Wolfie, like, I have so much respect for Wolfie because with that last name, it comes so much baggage, and he is just making a statement with each one of these albums. Sure, he could have the guys play on it, but the fact that he's playing everything on it, I hope he keeps doing that and keeps touring with the band, because it is a statement that you can do all of that. And Prince was that way too. If like early on, Prince he was playing like 28 instruments. I mean, he was a musical genius. But thank
Yeah.
you again. I'm eternally grateful for you and for Frank for making it happen, and for Wolfie to spending his time to come
What I
out.
love what I love about those guys is they're practical jokers. They're having fun. They're on tour, they pull pranks on each other, and like that's what life is all about. And how that relates to me, everything relates to trading. Is trading's intense. Putting music is intense. Dealing with the markets, going on tour, whatever. Life's a grind, no matter what you do. But you got to have a light heart about things and don't take things so seriously. And just you got to enjoy it. And those guys, if I learn anything, even though they're both younger than me, I don't care. I learned from my 12-year-old nephew. Like those guys are just lighthearted and enjoy themselves. And it's really a lot to learn, especially in the intense world of Wall Street and trading that we're involved in.
Yeah, and they seem very down to earth. I mean, especially we got to spend a lot of time with Frank, with you, and he just seems so down to earth. And I hope it's the Hard Hat Lounge, right? Is
Hard
his
Hat Lounge. He bought that a couple years ago and runs it, and it's become a kind of a hotspot in Vegas. It's a lot of locals, and it's really got a lot of buzz around it. So it's crowded a lot whenever I go.
Oh, cool. Well, next time I'm in Vegas, I'm definitely going to go
Yeah,
to
we'll
the Hard.
go for
Yeah,
sure.
that'll be a ton of fun. Hopefully he's in town, but I know he's probably always touring. So we're going to circle back to Thriller, Beat It, Billie Jean. So be
Fine.
thinking.
I'll go with Billie Jean. That's fine.
Okay, you'll go with Billie Jean. I'm
I'm
going to
I'm
go.
I'm just throwing a dart. I could flip a coin, although I need a three-sided coin. But
Yeah, I'm going to
oh,
go with Beat It. I'm going to go with Beat It
okay.
on that one. Okay, now we're going to go
I
with.
guess yeah, because the Eddie thing, we can go with Beat
Yeah.
It. That's
But
fine. Yeah.
still, I would still go with Beat It. But the Thriller, what was cool, speaking of Mammoth, like their latest song that they released, the end, in the video that went out with it, that the Robert Rodriguez directed, was so much like Thriller. It was like it just
Oh, it was
you brought
awesome.
that all back, right?
Everyone should check that out. Just YouTube "The End" by Mammoth, and it's a really artistically and just everything is just it's very incredibly produced video.
What's your favorite part of it? I'll tell you, my favorite part is just seeing Slash just hanging out, just like kind of like just taking it all in and just kind of laughing while everyone's. Well, I don't want to give things away. If you have
Yeah,
something, because it's like a mini movie,
yeah.
in a video. So, without giving anything away, what would be your favorite part of it?
No, the cameos are my favorite part because
Yeah,
they're definitely cool. Yeah.
yeah, and then Valerie was in there, and God, it's so many people. Okay, so now we're moving on to the last three songs: "Human Nature," "Pretty Young Thing," (PYT), or "The Lady in My Life." So, "Human
Human
Nature,"
Nature,
of course.
hands
That
down.
was such a great.
Written by Toto for Michael Jackson.
Oh, I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. So Steve Lukather did a lot of the music on it, right? From
Yeah, the
Toto?
Picaro as well. Like I think they wrote it. So if you actually YouTube that, there's Toto singing "Human Nature," but I don't know the exact story. I don't know if they wrote it for him or when they wrote it, they said, "Hey, this would be great for you." But it was originally a Toto song that they. I don't know how the business works, where they sell it to you or license it or whatever. But it was written for and given to Michael Jackson. So uh,
Wow.
I
It's
think
such a beautiful song. There was a version of it, it might have been after Michael passed, but it might have been something else, but I think it was after Michael passed. The John Mayer did a instrumental version of it, and it just bring you to tears. It was
oh, it's great. It's great.
so
Such a
good.
great song.
So good. Okay, so that is the so your favorite song on the entire album would be.
Ugh. Let's go with Human Nature.
Okay, we'll go with you. I would, you know what? I would say that,
Just because it's a little bit, they're all awesome hits. It's just a little bit not as mainstream as the other ones, I guess.
yeah, I would agree with you on that, and I'll leave out the Eddie thing, and I think I'm going to go with Human Nature with you on that because it is, yeah, that's a special one. But I'm looking at the number of listens that it got, and it's got one of the fewest number versus the other ones. But anyways, it was just wonderful having you on. I can't wait to be back on your podcast, to have you back on this one, and really just next time we get to hang out and have some fun. Any parting words that you want to leave folks with?
No, just keep working hard and, stay confident, protect your confidence. Your mental capital is just as important as your actual physical capital. So, to your point about, look, don't let the highs get too high. I always remind people of the cycles. When things are good, it's great. Take advantage of them, but, don't let them get too high. And when we have corrections, try to learn from my mistakes and my stuff that I went through. Don't get too low. Realize that these are just part of the cycles of the markets, and always, always, always protect your confidence.
Well, that's wonderful. So until next time, everyone, peace out.
Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, man.